Good morning, everybody. Our text in Acts this morning is chapters 25 and 26. Sort of a transition toward or from Paul's imprisonment in the region of Judea, moving towards Rome. We kind of get the incident this morning as to why he heads toward Rome, and we get a very long defense that he offers for what he's doing and for the gospel. And so we're going to work our way that direction, Lord willing. I look forward to hearing your comments, hearing what you have to say about the text, and hopefully sharing with you some things that are interesting and kind of go from there. All right. It should be noted that I should get points for not teaching something out of the Old Testament. So I will take all of those gladly.
We'll put it in the minutes.
That's right. Put it in the minutes that it wasn't from the first 3 quarters of the Bible. Yes? We shall see. All right, let's offer a word of prayer and then we'll talk about it. Our great God and our Father, we honor you as holy, as the God who has no equal, no competitor, the God who can know no challenger, the God who is alone. And yet because of that, Father, the God who is special, you are the creator of all things. You are the giver of our purpose. You give us meaning. You give us form and function. You give us the ability to know your mind in the way you've revealed it to us. You've given us a portion of it that we can understand by way of your word, and we're able to read from it things that happened many centuries ago, as we're going to look by your will this morning. Thank you for the opportunity to study. Thank you for your wisdom and power in preserving this word in its current form. Thank you for men like Paul that we get to study about this morning. Thank you for the opportunity you gave him through the gospel and the opportunity you give us through the gospel to be forgiven, to stand before you justified, to one day stand before you and praise your greatness for all eternity. Lord, we're mindful of those who cannot be with us this morning. Many are sick and going through ongoing afflictions. Help us to look to help one another. Help us to look ultimately to you. Because no matter what kind of help we can give to each other, you are the only one that can give help from death itself. Help us to trust you, to serve you for every day and every minute of our lives. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Quick summary, sort of working your way through the text. Here are the things you'll find if you just begin reading in Acts 25. Sadly, you would need actually to begin reading in Acts 24 because the story kind of begins there. Paul is imprisoned. He has been imprisoned by Felix. Felix is of the habit of listening to Paul. We see there at the end of chapter 24, Paul would reason with him in 24-25 about righteousness and self-control and the coming judgment. And in this occasion, Felix was alarmed. He sent him away and he says, well, now I'll get an opportunity. I will summon you. It doesn't seem like Felix is listening to Paul in good faith based on what's coming up next. He had hoped at some point that Paul would either pony up his own bail money or have somebody else do it for him. And so the idea was, I'll keep him around and I'll just keep him talking, and hopefully one day he'll bail himself out, and then he'll profit from the deal, and the Jews will be happy in the meantime since he's been imprisoned. 2 years go by with this sort of arrangement going on. Felix is succeeded by Porcius Festus. Felix wasn't so great of a guy. Festus really wasn't around all that long either. He wanted to do the Jews a favor, so he left Paul in prison, and that brings us to chapter 25. In Jerusalem, as Festus is visiting from Caesarea Maritima, Festus is approached by the Jewish leaders and basically said, we don't like this guy Paul. We want to bring him to Jerusalem to have him tried here. And the text tells us the reason why. They had intended on ambushing him and killing him on the way there. That would not have been an unusual thing given the sort of bandits that were running around. All bandits respect one thing, and that's money. So if you give them enough money, they'll do the things you want them to do, and I'm surely they would have employed that sort of thing to have this happen. Festus said, basically, Caesarea is the place where he ought to be tried, and so that's where it will happen. He's brought before Festus. Paul defends himself. Festus realizes he's not guilty in regard to any Jewish law or any Roman law. There's nothing, there's no there, right? It's just some argument over the religion. And that really wasn't a Roman concern, not something he cared to deal with. But I think knowing what the Jews still wanted to do, he offers to have Paul extradited to Jerusalem. Paul refuses, claiming his Roman citizenship and the rights of that, one of which was directly appealing to Caesar. Every Roman citizen had the right to have their case heard directly by Caesar himself. It's also sort of a hazardous thing to do. You don't want to bring up something frivolous to Caesar, lest you make him mad and he decide to kill you for wasting his time, as he could have done. So it was a privilege, but it was a dangerous one to exercise. Festus's hands are tied at this point. However, he runs into Agrippa and Bernice. Bernice, or rather, he decides to describe to Agrippa, this is the end of chapter 25, the situation, and then Agrippa wants to hear what Paul has to say for himself, and so they make this happen. They get in a big audience hall, lots of pomp and circumstance. They probably didn't play the song, but they all came in with their things, and then they set Paul in front of them. Festus does a very interesting job of introducing himself as the good guy, and Paul is the reason for all this problem. And then Paul begins at the beginning of chapter 26 to defend himself. The actual defense is somewhat close to others that he's done, right? If you read about his experience in Acts chapter 9, and then you read his own description of it in Acts chapter 22, you'll see obviously a lot of parallels, okay, between those two things. He recounts, as it says there, who he was before the road to Damascus incident, being a persecutor, a Pharisee. He describes the incident on the road to Damascus, and then he declares from 19 to 23 that in essence he is obedient to God. They have no right to judge him according to Jewish law because he hasn't violated that. He's not a heretic. He's not somebody that's religiously off base. He's actually in obedience to what God wants him to do. And his task since the moment that he was converted has been to preach Jesus from the Old Testament. You can see there, where was the line? Verse 23, or verse 22. To this day I've had the help that comes from God, and so I stand here testifying both to small and great, saying nothing but what the prophets and Moses said would come to pass. That the Christ would suffer, and by being the first to rise from the dead, he would proclaim light both to our people and to the Gentiles. Paul is doing what preachers have done ever since. Use the Bible and defend Jesus. Now, he only mentions Moses and the prophets because the book of Acts didn't exist yet, right? There's no Romans, there's no Galatians. He only has the first 39, and so that's what he's using, right? From Moses to the prophets is kind of a way of saying all of it beginning to end. Now, Festus and Agrippa both have a response to Paul. Festus's response is, look, you're nuts. You've spent a little too long in the book. Your wires are crossed. You've been driven mad by great learning. Paul says, that's not the case, right? That's not what's going on here, right? He's speaking with true and rational words, chapter 26 and verse 25. And then he turns his attention directly to Agrippa. And he asks Agrippa directly whether or not he believes the prophets. And he actually declares that he believes the prophets. And then there's that famous line by Agrippa in verse 28. The ESV puts it, in a short time would you persuade me to be a Christian? Now the ESV words that as a question. There is some debate as to how that's supposed to be done. I won't get into all of that, but there are some questions there. At the end of the day, the entourage, all of the important people get up and leave, and they have a meeting. And at the end of that meeting, what they declare is, number one, Paul's innocent the way Festus said that he was. Right? Festus, they didn't come to any new conclusions there. He's just as innocent now as he was before. And because of that, they would have let him go, except he pulled the whole, I want to go to Caesar thing. And because of that, they were actually legally bound to take him there. Right? It would have been illegal for them not to just take him to Caesar, right? Because he invoked It's like with pirates when you invoke the right of parley. Anybody watch Pirates of the Caribbean? They got to go at that point, right? And this is kind of the same thing. He invoked the right to go to Caesar, and so to Caesar he has to go. Let's talk for a second about Festus. There's not a lot of information about him, historically speaking. The name isn't anything special. It just means festival. I guess this guy's a party guy. I don't. Porcius Festus. He likes a good time, I guess. He was sent by Nero to be procurator of Judea in sometime around 59. This is from Wikipedia, the picture on the right. Those are actually coins that were minted by him. Those would be an incredibly rare thing just because he wasn't around very long. He wasn't around for 40 years to print a bunch of money. He was there only for a couple of years. He is portrayed historically as an upgrade from Felix. Right? They got rid of Felix and they put in Festus, and it seems that was better for everybody involved. When you look at Josephus describes him as dealing with the Sicarii, which is kind of like roving bandits, terrorist kind of people, right? Maybe those are the ones the Jews were going to have kill Paul, but that's another thing. When the Jews were upset over Agrippa II's dining room, which they built tall enough to overlook the temple wall, which is kind of a problem, Festus kind of works with them overall. He allows them to go to Nero and appeal that directly. And he dies some 2 years later. Before we get to other stuff, let's look at Herod Agrippa II also. The Agrippa that's in this section, it's probably better if we call him Herod Agrippa because that'll help us with how he connects to the rest of the story. It seems kind of random when you're just reading through Acts that there's this guy called Agrippa, and he seems to know something about the Jewish law, and you're like, well, who is this guy? Well, he knows something about Jewish law because he's the last of the Herodian kings, like Herod the Great from the Gospel stories, and Herod the First, or Agrippa the First, I should say. This is that same guy. If you're interested, you can buy a coin that was minted in 77 under him for a cool $1,450. That is there if it's available. Or if you're in the rare coin business, you can go and acquire that. Josephus, and from what we've read in Acts 26, Agrippa seems to have embraced Judaism on some level, as in he was a practitioner at least somewhat. Josephus tells an interesting account. When Agrippa II has his two sisters married off, he required that their husbands be circumcised. One of them, it seems, did, and the other one backed out on the deal. Right? He decided that was too much for him. What is sort of scandalous about Agrippa II is that it's widely believed that the Bernice that's mentioned here in 25:13 is his, well, we know it's his sister, and we think she was his, what's the word I'm looking for? Escort? I don't know, whatever the word is for it, right? Not brother-sister type relationship, right? Widely believed that was the case. Later on, she does get married, but that doesn't seem to help the rumors at all because she winds up leaving him too. So there's that. Just to connect Herod Agrippa II, just so we know who we're talking about, the Herod that had all of the infants killed in the gospel story is Herod the Great, right? Matthew chapter 2, when he orders all the infants 2 years and under to be killed, that's him. If you follow the family line down through Aristobulus and Agrippa I, when we read of a Herod in the book of Acts before this point, that's the Herod we're talking about. Agrippa I would have been the Herod that, you remember, dressed himself up in finery and issued a great speech, and everyone said, "It's the voice of a god," and then the real God said, "No, it's not," and he dies a very painful death right there. The guy we're talking about today in our story is his son. And of course, Bernice is his sister / wife, which is of course weird. There's another chart. Okay, new favorite toy. And I know you got to be an extra Bible nerd to like this kind of thing, so bear with me. There is a website called, and it's so small, the Stanford Geospatial Network Model of the Roman World. I know that sounds like a nap-inducing title, right? What it is, it's a 3D model of the Roman world. It has 3D maps 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 of the Roman These guys got together and they said, what were all of the routes of travel that were available to Romans in the first century between all of the different cities that they controlled, right? The Romans built the roads, that kind of thing. What you're able to do at this website is plug in the names of 2 cities and then ask it, how long would it have taken to get from here to there in their time? Right? So not like in the Chevy, but like on the camel or the boat or whatever, by whatever means of transport they had. How long would it have taken to get there? According to this, and I said it for the fastest route in good weather, right? So no hurricanes or anything like that. It's estimated it would have taken 2.5 days to get from Jerusalem to Caesarea. Here's why I bring that up. Go back to your text and look at chapter 25. When Festus gets to Jerusalem from Caesarea, from that city at the top of the map there, the Jews come up and they ask Paul to be extradited to Jerusalem to be tried. Festus refuses, saying, look, I'm going to go judge this thing in Caesarea. But look at verse 6. After he stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea. Down is appropriate because Jerusalem was a higher elevation and you had to go down to Caesarea, which was, of course, on the coast. So going down, even though it's north, is an appropriate way of describing that. It's one of those things where, as I was reading through the text, my first question I asked was, why didn't Festus summon Paul to Jerusalem sooner? Seems like he could have just dealt with it, without waiting another week to go home, right? It wasn't a matter of, well, I'm not going to be here long enough to deal with this, so Paul's going to have to wait in Caesarea. He was there in Jerusalem way more than enough time to have him brought. So the reason had to be for something else, right? It wasn't a matter of distance or time. It was a matter of Paul being a Roman citizen. Caesarea was the residence of the Roman governor, which is where Roman citizens should be tried for whatever crimes they have, right? Caesarea would have been the appropriate place to try him. So not only, he didn't want to deal with it religiously, but he didn't want to go against that. Okay, question time. Now you guys get a chance. I'm following roughly the questions that Donnie or Rader had in his material. So tell me about Festus' attitude towards Paul and the Jews. You can take one at a time. All right. Tell me what you think about that. I've been talking long enough. Nobody cares what we think about Paul Festus' attitude.
All right, let's start with Paul. His attitude towards Paul, I would have described it as almost indifferent because, frankly, he cared more about the Jews in this matter than he did about Paul.
Mm-hmm.
So Paul was just, if you will, an annoyance or something I have to deal with.
Yep.
The duties of my job require me to handle the matter of this man who's been charged.
Yeah, he's a leftover problem from Felix. And the extent of this problem is how much he makes the Jews mad, right? Because that's the real kind of issue here. The Jews are upset with him, and so I need to deal with this, and I can't, he's a Roman citizen, so they got to be touch and go with that.
As you've already said, there's no evidence he's broken any Roman laws or any issues at all, really. It's just almost like, my words, not his, but a scuffle between religious factions that just don't agree on the resurrection of the dead or whatever it is, and it's like, I don't care at all about that.
Yeah.
But I want to placate it and keep control of those that we control.
Yeah, in 2 chapters, he's tried twice. And at the end of both of those, there's no there, right? Nothing to see. Yep.
The relationship with the Jews, there's the political relationship. I need to keep the peace here and use them as a political turning point strategy here. So, to give them peace by giving them Paul was, again, it's just a token for him. It's a chess piece.
Yeah, and you can see that at the end of 24, right? He wanted to do them a favor, so he left them in prison. Paul wasn't, even though he was a Roman citizen, he wasn't worth the trouble, right? It's kind of a weighing who do I make more mad at the moment, and it seems best to sort of keep him locked up. But he can't because he's Roman. So you see sort of the dilemma, right? he's a Roman. He hadn't done anything wrong according to Rome, but if I let him go, all these other people are going to be mad with me. So there's this, there's this constant conflict. And he's trying to work through that. And I think that's why he brings in Agrippa, right? To sort of give me some counsel what I ought to do with this guy. Yes?
The same position was taken by Gallio at Corinth, that whenever they had that disturbance, this is just a matter of religion, y'all can work that out yourself.
Mhm.
That's pretty much where Roman government ended it.
Right. Their task was to keep the peace, not solve all the problems. And that's where Pilate really got himself into trouble, was he didn't make enough peace with the Jews. He kept killing them, and that tends to ruin your relationship. How does that help us understand the way government leaders can and sometimes do treat Christians today? What does the relationship between Paul and Rome and Paul and the Jews help us with how we can look at the way government treats Christians now?
You can never be too cynical here. Don't ever make me choose between truth and my job.
Right.
Can I make it any simpler than that? It ultimately is about keeping me in this position of power.
Yep. The goal of politics is to stay in politics, right? At some level. Well, I won't say at every level, but eventually it winds up there with a lot of people, where their highest goal is to stay here or to go up, right, up the chain.
We like power, we like access to money.
Right. Those things are certainly helpful. What else does this tell us about how we can relate? And then Kimberly, you're next.
It reminds me of a stand-up routine I saw once where they described the difference between fathers and mothers. In this situation, government would be fathers. Fathers don't care about justice; they care about peace. And so again, when
This
you
is
talk
true.
about Christians in the world, the government cares that there's peace, and they may let justice slip if that requires peace.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Who cares if the Christians are mad so long as everything goes well and the taxes are paid? Right? That's where government really stops its concern. Yes?
Yeah, I think it can be helpful to remember, and something I had thought about before, but in the eyes of the government, Christians are really just like a pawn, or like a tool, to, I can't word it, but just like, a pawn. Like, I don't really
Yep.
care about your interests. You're just a tool for what I need to get done, or keeping the peace, or
Yeah.
That's
So
all.
why then would government be sympathetic to religious causes sometimes, and sort of not promoting it, but allowing it to have what it needs? And even in our country, the nonprofit status and all of that stuff, it profits them at some level, right? Because then you have a group of people who are relatively well behaved and pay their taxes, and typically don't run around burning things down, and that's advantageous to them, right?
At the end of the day, one of the elements also is you decide which one's more powerful, and you're going to placate that one. And it takes any. We've heard in this country for years the silent majority. Christians are the silent majority. The ones that make the noise are Muslims or whatever you want to say. And so a lot of times our society will placate the one that might have the greater political influence.
Yep.
That might affect them or their job, as Mark's already said. It's keeping your job, keeping happy, and so on and so forth.
All right. Let's think about this. Tell me how badly the Jews hate Paul. Not just, okay, we get it, they don't like him. How much do they not like him?
When you're planning to get somebody ambushed on the way, you hate them pretty much.
Yep.
You're saying, I don't care how they get killed, they just need to die.
Yep. Someone else fill in more of that. Like, there's some significant risk here. Kimberly?
blatant disregard for Jewish law came to mind.
Well, there's that, right? And then there's the folks who are in charge, with which murder is also a crime, right? So they're not only risking they're trampling Jewish law, but they're really risking their relationship with the Romans too. Because Rome, whatever you thought about them, they still thought murder was wrong. and did not want that to happen, and they would judge people who did that. Mike?
I think one of the undercurrents that is going on in this is that in 10 years, God's going to send the Romans to destroy the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And this story shows how corrupt that system is.
Absolutely.
You've got the highest religious leaders endorsing the plan to murder somebody.
Yep. Boy, that sounds familiar. Right? That's the end of the gospel accounts, where they had gotten to where this man, and what gets me is he's been in prison for 2 years. It wasn't like, okay, well, Paul's been locked up. He clearly hasn't been running the countryside for a couple of years. Let's just let bygones be. Even after all of that, they got a new leader, and as soon as the new leader came along, they come running into his throne room, you might say, saying, look, we got this guy, bring him to Jerusalem. This is long-term hatred, right? This is not just, we can't just let this go. Now, I don't think we're in danger now, most of us, of being ambushed on the way either here or home. But think about what are the dangers that face us from the people who don't like us. Now, maybe not to the extent that the Jews didn't like Paul, but what sorts of things might we run into? Because obviously there are people hostile to the faith, so what might we have to look out for? Yeah.
I think today, with like the media and everything and cancel culture, we are seen as hateful.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's just the title that we're given as hateful people because we don't accept all the lifestyles and stuff.
Yeah. So we get a bad rap on the online, marketplace in the public square. We're seen as the mean church down the street who does this and this and this and doesn't allow all these other things, right? Yes, sir.
I think too, we talk about ambush, right? The way we're being ambushed is desensitization,
Mm-hmm.
allowing those to slowly seep into our house, our life, to our kids. May not see it. My generation may be our dads, right? But then one after us was before, they moved the degree off the work and so on and so forth. And then pop.
Yeah. Talking about desensitization, it brought to mind, the things that are in the media that we watch, right? There are so much more now that is directly, openly hostile to Christianity, right? You have, during the opening ceremonies of the Olympics, right, a portrayal of the Last Supper with transgender individuals, right? I mean, that's not just, oh, we made a mistake, right? Some things are obvious, and we're getting more of that. Todd?
The ends justifies the means seems to be what is prevalent today. So many people are willing to sin, to do anything that's needed to advance their agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, while in the past, we may have people may have said things under their breath or something like that, or even to a friend. But now it's public. Somebody needs to take him out.
Yeah.
Paul, that's current.
Yep.
today.
The same logic they were using here still exists. Kimberly?
I was gonna say, going off of what Kendrick said, I think if you're not knowledgeable and watchful enough to notice it, the idea of just, oh, everybody's okay, you do your thing, I do my thing,
Mm-hmm.
can kind of become a bigger issue because it's sneaking in the idea that it doesn't matter what you do or what you believe, we're all just good.
Yeah, I mean, the Romans, that's how they governed, right? They didn't really care what you believe religiously, not yet, right? They do get to the point where they eventually, in a very hostile way, force emperor worship, right? But at least, I think as of now, it's not quite there yet. And so what's the trade? It's peace for truth. So long as we have peace, we don't care what you think. And that's where we are. That's now, that's current. Okay, something interesting happened in the text, and I caught this reading through. So in 25 and verse 8, when Paul defends himself before Festus for maybe kind of the first time, Paul argues in his defense, neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I committed any offense. Now, one distinction I think is pretty easy to see, right? Paul distinguishes between the things that would have made the Jews mad and the things that would have made the Romans mad. He says, I haven't done either of those. But with the things that made the Jews mad, he cut it into two sections. Did you catch that? I have not violated the law, nor the temple law, or, I haven't violated that. Why would he separate the two? Why would he separate those two things?
He had been accused of taking a Gentile into the temple, and that was one of the things they threw at him. It didn't happen, apparently, but Paul was friendly with this Gentile, and so they just assumed that he took him with him into the temple, which would have defiled the temple, which would have really got him up in arms against Paul.
Right. So he's basically saying, I haven't violated the law of Moses, the law and the prophets and all that stuff, nor have I done the specific thing I was accused of back in chapter 21, right, of bringing a Gentile into the temple, right, and defiling it.
Part of the reason may have been that originally the first charges made against Paul, there were two things: that he was a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, that would have been violating the law of Moses, right? And he defiled the temple by having this Gentile. So there were two charges laid at him, and in effect he's addressing each of those two charges that they originally made in his first hearing.
I think that's probably the where the dividing line is. What I thought interesting is when Festus is describing this in chapter 25, chapter 25, where is it? Verse 19. Rather, they had certain points of dispute with him about their religion and about a certain Jesus. So there's almost like there's two separate sort of things going on, right? The Jesus and whom Paul preached, who they might have said was was in violation of the law, and then the religious stuff. So it's one of those things you're reading through and you're like, why did he break that into two, right? And it makes sense when you go back and sort of read the context. When is it okay to just go with it and feign surrender so the problem is ended? It seems like it'd be a lot easier on Paul if he just says, okay, you got me, right? All right, I get it. I messed up. Sorry, y'all. Okay, I may have done something. I'm not saying I did, but when is it okay to just do that so that you can get out of jail and go back to doing what you're supposed to do? I know you're itching. What is it?
Yeah, to me, this is one of the interesting parts about Paul's defense. Because if you compare and contrast, Jesus did not attempt to defend himself against the charges. They were false charges. They misused the law. But he made no attempt to defend himself against them. Paul here takes every defense given to him and takes advantage of every, I appeal as a Roman citizen, he took full advantage of the legal rights that he had. Now, when you think about that a little bit more, Jesus, in effect, had no more legal rights than the ones that he used. I mean, he had the right to remain silent.
Yep.
And he chose to remain silent and make them prove their case, if you will. Paul here defended himself and appealed to Caesar. So in a way he took the opposite, but he had the right to do that. He used every right that he had, and beyond that he went no further. And Jesus used Jesus used the legal right that he had because everything was stacked against him. The only thing he could do was to remain silent. And so he did what he was permitted to do. So it's interesting to think about both of them in trials, how they reacted.
Yep.
When you can't do any more and you allowed yourself every defense that you have, you submit.
Yeah.
Success was chosen instrument to carry my name before Gentiles, kings, and the children of Israel.
Mhm.
This was the thing he was there to accomplish. Why would you want to get out of this situation?
Right.
You are aligned with God's mission. We want to get out of that situation when we have a mission separate from God's.
Yep. His purpose was to stand there and defend himself and prove that he wasn't wrong. He hadn't violated the law, nor had he violated Roman law. That's why he was there. Him being in prison was an accessory to that end. Not only that, but he's been already told that he's headed to Rome anyway, right? He's already been informed of that. So this is the plan, right? And him for just to say, well, okay, I'm out. That wasn't what he was given to do, right? It was his task. Kimberly?
So just to go further off of what Mark said, he used the rights he had to his advantage. So he didn't just I have these rights and I'm going to use them. He was strategic with it. And like you said, he knew he was going to go to Rome. When he went to Rome, he was given an audience to speak to it. And so he had that right and he used it so that he could further the gospel and the mission, like Corey mentioned. So it's not just a passive, these are the rights I have and I'm, doing what has to be done. He was strategic about it and had a plan and he followed that through.
I agree. All right. Can you look with me at the end of chapter 25? We're not nearly... How long do I have? I don't teach this particular class. Not nearly long enough. Boy, that's a consistent theme, isn't it? Look at 25 for me real quick. 25 and 23. My question here is, why the big to-do over this? Because it seems like it would have been just as easy to say, all right, I want to hear it. Agrippa says, I want to hear the man myself. And Festus goes, okay, sure, let me go get him from prison. And they go get the man, and they bring him in, and they listen to him. Why the big to-do here? Because it seems, it's not like Paul is Caesar himself. It's not like Paul is, he's not a celebrity in jail here. But they make it an occasion for a big show, right? Agrippa and Bernice come in with great pomp. They've managed to invite the military tribunes and the prominent men of the city. How did they know to be there? Someone had to tell them, hey, there's going to be a big thing tomorrow. You better show up, right? And then Festus comes in and he gives this big speech, about, in essence, saying, I don't know what to tell Caesar about this man. There's more going on here than just we want to hear what Paul has to say. This is an opportunity to kind of puff up the feathers a little bit and be showy, right?
Forge alliances.
Yep. The point of it doesn't seem necessarily to be, let's make sure Paul gets a fair shake. There's other things happening here, right? And you can see that.
And the other thing, this situation doesn't happen every day. This is very, very unique to the Romans at this time. That this individual who is a influencer to the Christians is also a Roman citizen. And so it's not a bad time to have a spectacle.
Yeah.
Because, like Mark says, it's influence. You can gain some political support with the Romans, and you can maybe keep yourself from upsetting the Jews.
You can paint yourself as this fair, impartial, kind ruler
Exactly.
who had, could have just had him killed out back, but he didn't. He says, well, I've brought him forward, and I wanted to make sure. See what I mean? There's more going on than just let's make sure Paul's doing the right thing.
And you notice every time they tell a story, they look good.
Mm-hmm.
All the Romans, if you look at
No
it,
doubt.
the whole time, they look good. Their story is not necessarily accurate, but it makes themselves look good.
This is Pilate before, this is like Pilate sending Jesus to Herod, if you will. That same, a parallel idea. You're sending over him, let him hear this matter as well. And what was the result? Pilate and Herod formed friendship as a result of that, if you will, kindness
Yep.
that Pilate showed. I see that this could be a lot of the same thing.
Same kind of stuff.
Of an alliance, a friendship between us.
There's more.
I need a favor in the future.
There's more things going on than just making sure someone gets a fair shake. And we have to remember that when we deal with political circles, right? We got to remember that. I'm not saying every political circle is corrupt, but the interests of that circle are often not yours, not mine. There are other things going on. There are other forces at play here. And when we wonder why sometimes our politicians seem to go so far astray on what we might call just social issues, it's not because they're just reading the Bible trying to figure out the right thing to do. There's other stuff going on. They care about other things. And it's just good for us to remember that and not be so obliterated every time it happens, right? Oh, what's happening? Well, it's the same thing that's always happened, right? There's other stuff going on. And it's not always just about the rightness or wrongness of the thing. We got to remember that when we deal with the world, because they had to deal with it here. Okay. I'm glad the bell rang, because I wanted to ask this one. Paul appeals directly to his rights as a Roman citizen. Is this a failure to trust God? And if not, why not?
I was thinking about this earlier when you were talking about Jesus versus Paul.
Mhm.
Which one was more godly? Is it more godly to be meek as Moses, meek as Jesus, or was it more godly to be, Paul defending his rights with his? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's not the question. It's the effect that they're trying to have, and what it takes to get the gospel where it needs to be. In Paul's case, the gospel getting where it needed to be was going to be more accomplished by him defending against these charges. In Jesus' cases, dying for my sins, that happened because of his meekness before the court, and let it do its thing, and I'm going to do my thing.
Different purposes at play. Yes, sir.
Another thing working in this, that heretofore Christianity has been viewed as a different sect, like the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's a line developing between them. And is Christianity going to be given the approval of Roman law? And we saw that in Philippi, when Paul said, they beat us publicly uncondemned.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're going to lead us out by the hand to show to this community that what you did was illegal.
Mm-hmm.
And other Christians who believe the same way should expect to be treated with the same kind of respect I'm asking you to do for me right now. So there's some of this playing as well.
Mm-hmm.
How much of it, I don't know.
Yep. It's a good question, though, is it not? Like, at one point, do you know? And I think that's probably a matter of judgment for each person. I don't think there's a line where you go, okay, well, if you do everything up to here, then you're faithful. I don't think that's true, right? But you can imagine that the heart that does not fully trust in God would run immediately to all of those other things and try those first. And then when all available options are exhausted, okay, now we'll pray. Now we'll lean on God, right? That's the story of the kings of Israel, right? They didn't really even give lip service to Yahweh, but even the kings of Judah, several of them, we trust in God, but what are we going to do when trouble comes? Well, we'll go get Assyria, we'll go get Egypt, they'll help us, right? There's a difference, and we got to be able to be mindful of that difference between using your resources and trusting in God, right? And being able to do that. Okay. 26:22, Paul says something interesting. He says, "To this day I have had the help that comes from God, and so I stand here testifying both to small and the great, saying nothing but what the prophets and Moses said would come to pass." I wanted to think about the first half of that verse. To this day I've had the help that comes from God. Does that strike you as a strange sort of statement, given where Paul is and what he's been through? I can see where you're reading through and the sort of the not invested reader of Scripture would go, what? It doesn't exactly appear like it seems like he's been passed from jail cell to jail cell, and everybody he talks to, people don't want to listen. He's having to write, and then he gets before these guys, and they don't want to have any. And it seems weird for Paul to say something like, "To this day I've had the help that comes from God," right? Yes, sir.
In relative terms, we know he avoided the beating that he would have gotten by saying, "Hey, you beat up Roman citizens?"
Right.
Roman citizens. And they also gave him relative latitude to have visitors and so on and so forth. So he was incarcerated, clearly, and he lost his freedoms, but he had a lot of liberalities or And he was still able to preach and teach. People came to him and so on and so forth. So in relative terms for being in a jail, he had a relative normal life.
Yeah, we tend to want to think I've had the help that comes from God means everything has gone my way all the time. Right? I have had no trouble, I've had peace, I've had everything I've ever wanted. And that's not the way it works. Right? To this day, I've had the help that comes from God. Means I have to also trust whatever help He's decided to give me and understand that that's okay and that's correct and that's right. Right? I have to trust Him in His methods also. Okay, well, as per usual, completely out of everything. Well, I made it almost halfway through the questions. All right, there was more to go. Next week, whoever teaches that class will have chapter 27, Paul's trip to Rome, the shipwreck at sea, and those sorts of things. Really, really a great chapter. But thank you all for your comments. If I don't get through my stuff because you guys are talking, that's a positive. All right, so I appreciate that.